I used to think there was something noble about being the quiet one, the dependable daughter, the one who didn't ask for too much, didn't raise her voice, didn't make things harder than they already were. I wore that role like a second skin, and for years I thought it made me strong. There was never a dramatic moment, no screaming matches, no slammed doors, no clear declaration that I mattered less. It was smaller than that, softer, like a faucet with a slow leak that you never fix because it doesn't seem urgent enough. That was my childhood. 1,000 little drips of being second. My name is Ava Delaney, and for 34 years I lived in the quiet shadow of my younger sister. Her name is Harper. She was always described as delicate, sensitive, complicated, and I was always expected to adjust around her. If Harper didn't like the meal, we ate something else. If Harper cried, I was told to be the bigger person. If Harper failed, I was asked to succeed without making her feel bad. It didn't feel cruel. That's what made it hard to explain. My parents, Melissa and Tom, smiled through it all. They told me how proud they were of my independence, my maturity. But what they really meant was that I didn't need them, not like Harper did. So I became what they praised: self-sufficient, quiet, invisible. I didn't complain. I didn't push back. I told myself it was love, that this was how families worked. You give what you can, you take what you must, and you don't make it harder for the people who already struggle. But then came the day I got married, and for the first time, I wasn't the background character in my own life. I was center stage. I was seen. And that's when it happened. The moment that broke everything open. They smiled at me like they always had, and then they said it. "We're keeping your gift money. Harper needs it more." It started before I even knew what was happening. I was 5 when Harper was born. I remember holding her tiny hand in the hospital, my mother's voice floating above me like a lullaby, saying, "Be gentle with her, Ava, she's fragile." That word stuck to her like glue. Fragile. I don't remember being called that, not once. As we got older, the divide grew in silence, not in arguments. Harper didn't like loud noises, so the TV stayed quiet. Harper didn't like sharing, so I gave up toys before there was even a fight. Harper didn't want to walk to school, so Dad drove her, and I just walked alone. None of it was forced exactly. No one screamed. No one punished me. They just looked at me with those soft, tired eyes and said the same thing in 100 ways. "You understand, right, Ava? She needs more." So I nodded. I always nodded. When Harper forgot her homework, I gave her mine. When she spilled juice on my drawings, I crumpled them up before anyone saw. When she screamed over nothing and I flinched, I got sent to my room for upsetting her. It wasn't fair, but it was normal. I thought that was love. You keep the peace. You take the hit. You let the storm pass over and tell yourself it's okay because at least no one's yelling. I didn't realize I was being trained to disappear, trained to expect nothing and be grateful for crumbs. Birthdays were the same. I got a small cake from the grocery store. Harper got parties with themes and rented ponies. I got books. She got iPads. My parents never forgot my birthday. They just never really celebrated it. And when I said something when I dared to ask if we could maybe do something special next year, they said, "Ava, honey, you're so mature, we didn't think you'd care about that." Maturity. That was the label they slapped over my disappointment, like it was a trophy. I wore it proudly for years, not realizing it was a muzzle. In school, I was the quiet kid, good grades, perfect attendance, no trouble, no voice. Harper got into fights with teachers. She got detentions. But every time she came home crying, I got the speech. "She's just sensitive, Ava. Can't you just be there for her?" So I was. I helped with her homework. I packed her lunches when Mom was too tired. I learned how to hide my needs so well I forgot they existed. The first time I got an award at school for a writing contest, I ran home beaming. I thought maybe this time they'd see me. My name was in the local paper. I put the clipping on the fridge. Harper ripped it off an hour later because it made her feel bad that I was good at something. My mother took her side, told me I shouldn't flaunt things, that it wasn't kind. I stopped entering contests. At 13, I got a babysitting job. I wanted to save for a summer camp my friends were going to. Harper wanted to go too, but didn't want to work. My parents paid for her and told me I was responsible enough to fund myself. So I did. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just worked. That's what I did. I made myself smaller to keep things running. I carried the emotional weight of our house while Harper was allowed to collapse at the slightest inconvenience. The older we got, the worse it felt. She started drinking in high school, got caught shoplifting once. Still, my parents said it was just a phase. She's under pressure. Ava don't make things harder. I was the one who drove her home from parties, cleaned up after her messes, helped her lie to our parents to protect her from consequences they never planned to enforce anyway. When I told them I was tired, they said that's what big sisters do. You carry your sibling until they can walk on their own. But Harper never walked. She floated on a raft made of my sacrifices, and I kept swimming, because if I stopped, I didn't know who I'd be. All I had ever been was the one who could take it. I thought maybe things would even out once we were adults, that with age would come balance, but I was wrong because the pattern didn't change, it just evolved. At 18, I moved out. Not because I was ready, but because I had to. My parents said they were proud of me, but they didn't help. No care packages, no financial support, no check-in calls unless it was about Harper. I shared a one-bedroom apartment with 2 roommates, slept on a futon, and worked nights at a bookstore. I skipped meals to pay rent, drank instant coffee for dinner, and still sent home birthday cards every year. Meanwhile, Harper stayed home. She said she needed time to find herself, and our parents agreed. She enrolled in an online photography course, then dropped it. Started a podcast, then quit. Got a tattoo of a wolf howling at the moon, and said it represented her inner strength. My mother cried like Harper had graduated with honors. I applied for internships, begged for references, cold-called publishers until someone finally gave me a shot as an editorial assistant. I worked 12-hour days, drank too much caffeine, learned the ropes from scratch. When I called home to share the news, my dad said, "That's great, Ava, but listen, Harper's been feeling down lately. Could you maybe call her more often?" I said I barely had time to breathe. He said, "But she needs you." And that was always the end of the conversation. Harper got a part-time job at a vintage clothing store, then quit after a month because the manager said she was late too often. My parents told her she was too creative for retail. I paid off my student loans by 28. Harper didn't have any because she never finished school. When she needed a car, my parents bought her a used Subaru. When I asked about it, my mom said, "Harper needs independence, sweetie, you already have that." I wanted to ask if that meant I'd earned it, and Harper deserved it for free, but I didn't. I just nodded, again. At 30, I got promoted. I was now a full editor with my own list of clients. I worked with debut authors, guided their voices to the page, made a name for myself in the quiet way I always had. One night, I called home just to hear a familiar voice. My mom answered, said, "Oh, Ava, hold on. Harper's in a rough place again. Can we talk next week?" There was no anger in her voice, no malice, just dismissal. I wasn't a daughter. I was a lifeline, a background character in someone else's narrative, and I kept playing the part. I was the one who sent flowers when Mom had surgery, who reminded Dad about his checkups, who remembered anniversaries and mailed handwritten notes. Harper forgot birthdays and still got praised for sending a single emoji. I started therapy but never told them. I thought maybe if I figured out what was broken in me, I could fix the way they treated me. My therapist said, "What if it's not you that's broken?" I cried, not because I believed her, but because I wanted to. Harper moved to Portland, then back home, then to Denver and back again. Every time she burned a bridge, she blamed the world. Every time she needed help, they gave it. And every time I fell behind, there was only silence. I remember once calling my mom because I'd just gotten out of the ER after a fall. I had no one else. I said I'm okay, but scared. She sighed and said, "I wish we could help, honey, but Harper's credit card bill just came in and things are tight. You'll figure it out." And I did. I always did. That was the problem. They didn't help because they knew I'd survive. And somewhere along the way, they decided that was enough. Survival. Not support. Not care. Just survival. And the more I proved I didn't need them, the less they showed up. So I stopped calling unless it was about birthdays or holidays. I sent pictures when they asked and smiled in them even when I was exhausted. I kept playing the role, because if I didn't, I wasn't sure they'd even remember I existed. Until I met Rafe, and everything began to shift. I met Rafe at a book launch on a rainy Tuesday evening in Chicago, the kind of night where most people cancel and curl up under blankets, but not me and apparently not him. He stood near the back, flipping through a poetry collection with this quiet intensity that made the whole room feel slower. We struck up a conversation about Rilke, then about editing, then somehow about family. I didn't mean to open that door so early, but something in him made it feel safe. He didn't flinch when I mentioned Harper. He didn't change the subject when I said my parents tended to orbit around her needs. He just nodded and said that sounds lonely. No one had ever called it that before. We started seeing each other slowly, like we were both afraid to break something. He was a lawyer, not the flashy kind, but the kind who helped people who couldn't afford help. Eviction cases, workplace disputes, asylum filings. He carried other people's pain with a kind of grace I didn't think was possible, and he listened. Really listened. When I told him about the time Harper broke my laptop and my parents asked me to apologize for making her feel bad about it, he said, "Ava, that's not normal." And I knew it wasn't, but hearing him say it made it real. Rafe had grown up in foster care. He never met his biological parents. To him, family wasn't blood, it was choice. The people who show up and stay and hold you when the world doesn't. Being with him felt like breathing clean air after years underwater. He never asked me to be less or quieter or easier. He never made me the strong one by default. He just saw me. And he stayed. When he proposed, it was a Thursday morning over coffee. He slid a simple ring across the table and said, "I want to build a life with you, not around you, with you." I didn't cry. Not then. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it felt like I'd been chosen for the first time in my life. We started planning the wedding, and I thought maybe this was the start of something new. A chapter where I could have joy without guilt, where I could be celebrated without shame. I told my parents they sounded happy enough. My mom said, "Oh, sweetheart, weddings are such a lovely time." My dad said Rafe seems like a good guy. Harper didn't say much, just asked if she had to wear a dress. I didn't expect excitement, but I hoped for support. That's all I ever wanted. Quiet, steady support. Something like what I gave them for years. But the closer the date came, the more I felt the shift in the air, a subtle pull back into old roles. And I told myself it was just nerves, just the stress of logistics. But Rafe watched me closely, and one night he said they're going to try something, Ava. I shrugged it off, said they'd never sabotage my wedding. He just looked at me with that steady gaze and said, "I'm not saying they'll ruin it. I'm saying they don't know how to let you have something that's only yours." I didn't answer, because somewhere deep down I knew he was right. Planning the wedding should have been exciting, and for the first few weeks it was. We picked a venue just outside the city, a small art gallery with exposed brick and tall windows and light that poured in like a blessing. I found a dress that didn't just fit me, but felt like it knew me. Rafe handled the catering and music, and we agreed to keep things small, intimate, focused on joy, not performance. But the moment we started involving my parents, that quiet weight I'd carried for years settled back into my chest. My mom started making comments in the most casual way about costs and excess. "You're really spending that much on flowers, Ava. I mean, they die in a day. Or that cake looks beautiful, but don't you think something simpler would be more tasteful?" It wasn't overt sabotage. It was subtle erosion. Each comment planted a seed of doubt, like I should feel bad for having something nice. My dad was less vocal, but no less present. He'd sip his coffee and say things like, "Harper's been struggling lately. We're doing what we can to help, but things are tight." I didn't know what that had to do with my wedding, but I heard the implication anyway. Harper needs more. Again. Still. Always. Harper herself didn't hide her disinterest. She rolled her eyes when I talked about color palettes, scoffed when I mentioned a registry made loud snorting sounds when I cried during a cake tasting. At one point, she joked that I was turning into a Pinterest bride and asked if I'd ordered a crown too. I laughed with her because that's what I'd always done, laughed off the hurt to keep the peace. But Rafe noticed. One night while I was rearranging the seating chart for the 5th time, trying to avoid placing Harper near anyone who might trigger a meltdown, he put his hand over mine and said, "Ava, you don't have to contort yourself to make them comfortable. This is your wedding, not their therapy session." I stared at him, and for the first time, I let myself admit it. I was scared. Not of the marriage, of the family I came from, of what they'd do if they felt like they weren't the center of attention. Rafe nodded like he'd been waiting for me to catch up, and then he did something I didn't expect. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a white envelope sealed and stamped. Just in case, he said, and tucked it into his jacket. I didn't ask what was inside. I didn't want to know. Not yet. Part of me still hoped we wouldn't need it. That maybe, just this once, they'd let it be about me. That maybe they'd finally look at me and say, "You deserve this, Ava." But deep down, I knew better. The morning of the wedding was still and golden, like the universe was offering me one perfect day, or pretending it might. The sky was a soft blue, without a single cloud, and the light filtered through the gallery windows like something sacred. I woke before my alarm, not with nerves, but with a strange sense of peace, the kind you feel right before a storm you can't see but know is coming. My dress hung by the window, swaying gently in the breeze, and I thought maybe this time things would be different. Maybe they would show up for me not as responsibilities, but as people who loved me. My mother arrived early with a cup of tea in her hands and a smile that didn't reach her eyes but didn't need to. "You look beautiful, Ava," she said, smoothing my hair like she used to when I was small, like she'd forgotten all the times she'd turned away. I smiled back and told myself not to overthink it, not to ruin the moment by remembering all the other moments. Even Harper was quiet. She wore the bridesmaid dress without complaint, tied her hair back without drama, didn't roll her eyes even once. I mistook it for progress. I let myself believe that maybe the silence meant acceptance, not calculation. The ceremony was soft and warm. Vows spoken through held breath and trembling fingers. Rafe looked at me like I was something precious, like he saw every version of me and chose them all. The guests clapped and cried, and the air shimmered with champagne and violin notes and something that felt like joy. During the toasts, my mother even laughed. My father danced with me during the first song and whispered, "You did good, kid," in my ear like it meant something more. I held Rafe's hand and thought maybe I'd been wrong to worry, maybe they'd changed. And then I saw it. Tucked into my bouquet, a small ivory envelope with my mother's handwriting across the front. My heart skipped, but I told myself it was nothing. Something sentimental, maybe a blessing. I opened it and read the single line inside. "No matter what today, you are our daughter and you are loved." It should have felt like something, but instead it felt like a warning, like a soft curtain pulled over something sharper. I shook it off, smiled for the photos, laughed through dinner, pretended I couldn't feel the tension curling under the surface like a thread waiting to snap. The band played softly during dinner, the room buzzed with soft conversation and tinkling glasses, and for a while I let myself believe I was allowed to have this happiness without compromise. But then came the moment that shattered it. My mother approached me near the bar during a lull in the music, her expression gentle, too gentle, her hands clasped in front of her like she was about to share a secret. "Come with me for a second," she said, and I followed without question, because I always had. We stopped near a window where the light had dimmed and the noise of the party faded into background hum. She took my hands and squeezed them softly and smiled like she was giving me something instead of taking. "It's a beautiful night," she said, and I waited. Then her eyes met mine, and she spoke so softly I almost didn't hear it. "We're keeping your gift money. Harper needs it more." For a second, I just stared at her, waiting for the punchline, waiting for the real sentence to follow the clarification that never came. When I finally found my voice, it didn't rise, it didn't tremble, it just fell flat. "That money wasn't yours to touch." She blinked once as if surprised I'd responded at all, then smiled again, this time with that familiar patience, the one she used when Harper threw tantrums. "Sweetheart, you don't need it," she said. "You have Rafe now, you're building a life together. Harper's struggling, and it's only fair that she gets a little help." Behind her, the party kept going. People laughed, toasted, danced, but all I could hear was the blood in my ears and the hum of the air conditioning and my own thoughts screaming, "Finally! Finally, this is who they really are." I was still standing there, frozen hand limp in hers mind, trying to make sense of the audacity when I heard a voice behind me, calm, low, unwavering. "Good thing we planned for this." It was Rafe. I turned, and he was already walking toward us. Jacket-buttoned expression, unreadable eyes, sharp but steady like a man who had seen this moment coming a mile away. My mother's smile faltered just a fraction as he approached, but she didn't let go of my hand until Rafe stopped beside me and reached into his inside pocket, pulling out that same white envelope he'd tucked away weeks before. He held it between two fingers and offered it to her without a word. "Go ahead," he said. "Open it." My father had joined us by then, standing just behind my mother, arms crossed, face tightening like he expected a fight, but wasn't sure how to start it. My mother hesitated only a second before taking the envelope and sliding her nail under the seal with practiced grace. She pulled out the documents and began to read, and I watched her carefully. At first, nothing, then a blink, then a tightening of her lips. Her breath caught halfway through the second page. My father leaned over her shoulder and squinted at the print. "What the hell is this?" he muttered. Rafe didn't raise his voice, didn't flinch, didn't gloat. "It's a notarized legal declaration," he said, "signed 3 weeks ago. It states that all monetary and physical wedding gifts are the legal property of Ava and myself. Any attempt to withhold, redirect, or access those funds without our consent constitutes theft and will be prosecuted." The silence that followed was thick, like velvet soaked in oil, heavy, suffocating. My mother looked up at me finally, no longer smiling now, uncertain, maybe even afraid. "You wouldn't take us to court," she said, her voice barely audible. "We're your family." Rafe stepped slightly closer. Not threatening, just certain. "Oh, I would," he said, and he would. I knew that without question. My father's jaw worked, his hands clenched and unclenched, but he said nothing. And for once, I didn't speak either. I didn't need to. I had already spoken in 1,000 ways, by surviving, by thriving, by choosing someone who saw my worth and was willing to protect it. I stood beside Rafe and let them feel the discomfort they had never allowed themselves to feel. Behind us, the music picked up again, soft piano and laughter drifting through the gallery, but in that corner by the window, everything stood still. Harper arrived, then her heels clicking too loud, her eyes wide with confusion as she took in the scene. "What's going on?" she demanded, then saw the papers in my mother's hands and the envelope and Rafe's stillness, and she snapped. "This isn't fair," she cried, voice climbing pitch by pitch. "You don't need that money, Ava. You have a husband, you have a job, a future, everything, and I have nothing." Her voice cracked with each word, rising from frustration to something rawer. "I'm struggling, and you don't even care." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to, because in that moment, something clicked for me. She wasn't just being manipulative or selfish. She truly believed it. She believed that my stability was hers to dip into, that my happiness was a pie she deserved a slice of just because she didn't bake her own. Her pain, whether real or imagined, had always been treated as more urgent than my boundaries. Her failures always more important than my peace. I had spent decades hoping she would grow up, that she would realize she wasn't the center of every room, the protagonist of every story. But looking at her now, fists clenched, tears streaking her foundation voice, shrill with disbelief, I knew the truth. She wasn't going to change, and for the first time I wasn't sad about it. I was done waiting. Harper's voice kept rising like she couldn't hear herself, or maybe didn't care, her words crashing over each other in a desperate tide of blame and disbelief. She said things like, "I've had a hard life. You don't know what it's like to feel like nothing. You've always had it together, and I'm the one drowning and no one helps me." Not even you and I stood there watching her unravel and felt nothing. Not anger, not shock, just a cold detachment like watching someone else's drama on a screen you can't turn off. My father finally stepped forward, his face red with something deeper than fury. Maybe shame, maybe pride, cracking, I couldn't tell, and he pointed a shaking finger at me and said, "I have never been so ashamed of you, not in my life." His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a blade. Still, I didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't move. I met his eyes and held them steady and let the silence stretch between us like rope. And I didn't say it out loud, but I thought it, and I know he heard it. "You don't get to be ashamed of the daughter you never protected." Rafe stepped closer, his voice low but sharp, like tempered steel. "If you try to take 1 cent from us, we will see you in court." There was no threat in his tone, only certainty, and that's what made it final. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it again like she'd forgotten how to speak. Harper let out a small, wounded sound and turned away, clutching her arms like she was trying to hold herself together. My father just shook his head, like he couldn't believe this wasn't going the way it always had, like he still thought he could intimidate me into compliance. But I didn't look away. I didn't soften, because for once I didn't need to. The power had shifted and they didn't know what to do with it. Behind us, the music swelled as if the room was trying to return to celebration, but over here in this corner, the air had changed, and they could feel it. They finally knew I wasn't the same girl who folded to keep the peace. I had changed and they had lost control, and that terrified them. We started walking away, not in anger, not in haste, just step by step, breath by breath, like peeling away from a weight that had lived on my shoulders for years, and I didn't look back. Not even when the voices followed me. Harper's first shrill rising again behind us. She screamed that I was ruining everything, that I was selfish, that I was stealing her last chance to feel secure. Then, my father's voice low and rough, cursing under his breath, trying to hold together the dignity he believed he still had. Then, my mother, the last to speak, her voice not loud, just broken, barely a whisper. "Ava, wait, please." And I stopped. Not because I was swayed, but because I wanted to see what she looked like when the performance dropped. I turned, and she stood there smaller than I'd ever seen her, hands trembling, eyes wide and wet. Her mouth opened and closed like she was searching for the right script, but the teleprompter had failed. "You don't mean this," she whispered. "We're your family," and I let the silence sit between us, heavy and clear, and I watched her shoulders sag under it the way mine had for years, and then I spoke, not loud, not cruel, just certain. "You were never my family," I said, tilting my head. "You were Harper's," and the words landed not like a slap, but like a mirror shattering, and her hand dropped from where it had been, reaching out as if it had been burned. She didn't speak again, just stood there frozen, and I saw it happen, the collapse not of a woman, but of an illusion. The realization that I had finally chosen something other than them. I had chosen me. And this time, I wasn't leaving the door open. I wasn't playing the role. I wasn't hoping they'd follow. I was closing it behind me and locking it and walking into a life that didn't include their shadows, and as I turned back to Rafe, his hand warm in mine, the only sound that mattered was the rhythm of my own steps, steady, strong, free. We walked past the reception where laughter still spilled from champagne glasses and music floated like nothing had cracked open just minutes before, and I realized something profound, that life doesn't stop for pain. It keeps moving. The world doesn't pause to witness your freedom. It simply allows it. And that was enough. I didn't need applause or vindication or a final word. I didn't even need them to understand what they'd done to me, because I finally did, and that was all that mattered. I had spent most of my life hoping for something I was never going to get: validation from people who only loved the version of me that made their lives easier, but that version was gone. And I didn't mourn her, not anymore. The woman who used to stay quiet to keep the room calm, who gave up dreams and birthdays and dignity to avoid confrontation, she had chosen herself today, and that was a beginning, not an end. Rafe didn't say anything as we walked away, and he didn't need to. His presence beside me was the only confirmation I needed that I wasn't alone anymore, that family could be built, not inherited, that love could be something that protected instead of drained. The sun had started to set, and the light through the windows turned amber gold, as if the universe was marking this moment with something sacred, not dramatic, not explosive, just quiet transformation, the kind that changes everything. I didn't turn back, not once. I didn't check to see if they were still watching, if they were crying or arguing or realizing what they'd lost, because it didn't matter. They had already lost me years ago. They just hadn't noticed until now. I had always been the one who returned, who forgave, who stayed, who hoped, but this time I wasn't returning and I wasn't hoping, and that finality was peace, not bitterness. We stepped outside and the air felt different, lighter, like it had been waiting for me to release something I never should have carried, and I breathed it in. For the first time in years, I could actually breathe. There were no fireworks, no dramatic declarations, no revenge, just freedom. And sometimes that's the real ending, not confrontation, not closure, just the quiet decision to never go back. It's been months since the wedding, and people still ask if I've spoken to them, if I've patched things up, if I've reached out to make peace. But what they don't understand is that walking away wasn't about creating distance. It was about reclaiming space. Space in my mind, in my heart, in my life space that had been occupied for decades by guilt and duty and silence. And now that it's mine, I have no intention of giving it back. I used to think letting go meant loss, meant abandonment, meant becoming the very thing I feared. Selfish, cold, ungrateful, but now I know the truth. Letting go is not about shutting people out. It's about letting yourself in. It's choosing to stop bleeding for those who would never bandage you, choosing to stop shrinking so others can feel tall, choosing to stop asking for love in places that only offered transaction. My mother used to say that family is everything, but what she meant was that loyalty matters more than truth, and that silence matters more than fairness, and that survival is the same thing as love, and I don't believe that anymore. I believe in family that shows up in the quiet when there's no performance and people who protect you when no one's watching, in love that doesn't ask you to disappear. Rafe and I built something new, not out of spite but out of clarity. We built a home that doesn't reward suffering, that doesn't measure value by silence, that doesn't confuse obligation with care. And in that space, I've found more joy than I ever thought possible. Some days I still grieve not for them, but for the girl I used to be, the one who thought being chosen meant being useful, the one who waited a lifetime for someone to say she mattered and didn't realize she could say it herself. But grief doesn't mean regret. It means you've outgrown something you once loved, even if it never loved you back. And so I move forward, not with anger, not with vengeance, but with peace, the kind of peace that comes from knowing I will never again betray myself to keep someone else comfortable. I don't need apologies, I don't need explanations, I don't even need them to understand, because healing isn't a performance, and justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just a closed door, and the decision never to knock again. That is my ending and my beginning. And if you've ever felt like the background character in your own life, I hope you find the strength to write yourself into the center, not because anyone hands it to you, but because you take it and never let it go.